Hi, everyone. My name's Kathy. Thanks so much for joining today. We're going to dive into a session focused on scaling experimentation and really building a solid foundation for effective testing. So, whether you're a tech lead or data analyst and you're looking for ways to improve your experimentation process, today's talk will give you a lot of the insights that you can apply. We're thrilled to have Rudy, CRO at Mintminds. Um, Rudy spent years helping companies across many industries scale their experimentation program, mostly guiding folks through the technical and operational challenges of operating. He'll share lessons that he learned and strategies that can help your team move from like ad hoc testing to a more structured program. So with that, Rudy, the floor is yours.
All right. Let's see if I can share the right screen this time. Yes, I think you should see my main presentation screen.
Yep, it's looking good.
Perfect, perfect. All right, everybody. Yes, excited to be here. We've been on GrowthBook for now over a little bit over a year. We had a lot of experience with tools like Optimizely and Convert. But last year we decided to start working with GrowthBook as one of our clients started on GrowthBook. It was a bit of a challenge, but we managed and we've learned some cool things and we are very excited for the future. So with that, let's start. So the clients that we now work with that are on GrowthBook are Tome, which is a DIY market. Moneybird is a SaaS solution for doing your own finance, and a few others. Over the years, we participated in for awards and we won a couple. But to start this presentation, let me tell you a story about the conference known as Conversion Hotel. This is actually a very well-known conference here in the Netherlands. And this year they're doing a spin-off called Experiment Island in the States. And it's a conference, but not just any conference. In the Netherlands, it's hosted on an island in a full weekend in a hotel and nobody can leave. I know this sounds like Hotel California, except it isn't. So this conference is well known throughout the industry for its high level of knowledge and also knowledge sharing. You will never leave without learning something valuable. And last year, there was a bit of a trend and a lot of new buzzwords as well. But one of the most popular buzzwords was democratizing experimentation. And everybody in the organization should be able to test everything because then we can truly have a data-driven culture and a validation mindset and yada, 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 yada. Okay, so jokes aside, there certainly is a truth about this. So for the sake of this presentation, let's say we are all aboard on the democratization of experimentation. It's really easier said than done because back in the real world, we are faced with quite a bit of challenges on different levels. For example, you can have different tech stacks within your organization, like a web or app, or even different optimization tools or analytics tools. You can have different product teams with different goals and different KPIs, and in some cases, KPIs that are competing against different teams or when they're not aligned correctly. And then there are workflows and processes, of course. Teams have their different way of working and they have their management tools or process management tools where they're working in. And then we have, of course, data and how the data is collected. Maybe it can be collected through different tools. And finally, we have the price per experiment, because as much as we like to experiment a lot or everything, if you're using tools like Optimizely or Convert, they have this price per visit or price per visitor model. So the more you experiment, the more you have to pay for your tooling, which is contradicting what you're trying to achieve. The best thing would be actually to try and to reduce the price per experiment. And apart from these challenges, we also have our daily struggles, which is well known for everybody, the development roadmap. So every organization has its development roadmap, and most of the time they're set in stone, and it is dominated by a lot of stuff that most of the time wasn't tested or validated or even had a promising business case. And as we have different teams in an organization, some people refer to them as silos, but when there is a bug or when there is a site deployment and something goes wrong, because everything is scattered across teams and across tools, there's often a lot of finger pointing going around to blame the cause of the problem. And then having multiple tools, in this case, for example, optimization or experimentation tools or analytics tools, you can end up easily with unreliable data analytics and also with unreliable analysis of your experiment. Because experimentation tools sometimes have a different definition for specific metrics than your analytics tools. And if you're using the analytics part of your experimentation tool, then you essentially are building a second analytics implementation, which means that you also have to maintain that analytics implementation. And because you're already time consumed or constrained, having another analytics implementation besides your existing one makes it a risky thing, because when stuff breaks, you need to fix it, but first you need to find out about it. So if that happens when you're running experiments, then you can end up with experiments with data that is faulty. So those are the daily challenges that we face and the struggles that we must overcome if we want to achieve this holy grail of democratizing experimentation. And then there's a third thing, which is the growing number of experiment types. Because, well, when we started with experimentation, everybody was doing client-side experiments. But now we also want to do server-side experiments, and development teams are using feature flagging. We have marketing teams that also would like to do personalization. And we should be able to do very simple tests where we don't need developers. We have these visual editor experiments and so on. Even now, for example, SEO experiments, because SEOs, they would like to, for example, test page titles and meta descriptions. So all these things combined, CROs are almost like a Swiss pocket knife, trying to keep up with everything and making the best of the situation. And that's hard. So let alone scaling an experimentation program if you have to consider all these things. And even if you're a larger organization and where you're blessed with a center of excellence for your experimentation, they also struggle. They struggle with actually most of the time the same things, but on a larger scale, because they just run a higher volume of experiments. So what we need is a technical foundation that is built to scale and that takes into account all these challenges, struggles, and experiments. This is our approach. And as you can see, it consists of three main components. At the top left, we have the experimentation management that's being done in tools like Jira or Airtable or Notion. Then below that, we have the experiment engine. And in this case, we are running the experimentation platform from GrowthBook. And then on the right, we have all the different types of experiments. All right. So let's focus on the experiment engine. If you have different product teams across the organization, you can set up one or more projects in GrowthBook for every team. Every project can have its own variables, like attributes that you need for targeting, for example, device type, login status, page type, user type like B2B or B2C user, metrics. So like we said before, different teams can optimize for specific metrics, and even data sources. We can connect various different data sources, like for example, BigQuery. And on the SDK side or the tech stack side, every team can use its own or multiple different SDKs, but still run and work within the same experimentation platform. So now you create a situation where everybody can work and optimize for their own situation or responsibilities. And all this can then be managed and maintained by a CRO or a center of excellence. So the CRO or the center of excellence becomes sort of a support desk, assisting teams to work and run their experiments. And in doing so, they maintain a high level of quality and also reliable data. So now you have something that you can really give to other teams to join in on experimentation without impacting their way of working too much. With this experiment platform, we can basically run every experiment you can think of, whether it be client-side or server-side, or even SEO experiments. And they also respect the different workflows and processes. For example, feature flagging is a well-known type of releasing new features for being used by developers to release new features. But the feature flagging ability that we now have in GrowthBook makes it possible to A/B test site deployments and new features. And the way that how feature flagging works is very easy for developers. They just put a wrapper around the code to let GrowthBook know that it's a feature. This means for developers, very easy to set up an experiment without needing to log into a different tool or copy paste their code into an online interface. They can stay within their own environment and they can maintain their own way of working, but they're still able to easily create experiments. And we actually use this technique to launch personalization campaigns from other tools. So for example, within Salesforce Marketing Cloud, you have personalization feature, and there you can create different personalization campaigns. And the way we do it is that we set all the campaign triggers for Salesforce Marketing Cloud in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. When a campaign triggers, it sends a signal to our experiment in GrowthBook, and then the experiment is started from within GrowthBook. And so with this approach, you can centralize all your different tools and different way of working into one place in GrowthBook. And you are able to easily start testing everything. So in case of an emergency, if there is a bug or something somewhere, then because everything is centralized, people can go into GrowthBook and just switch features off and on or experiments off and on. So yeah, this is a major time saver if you're looking for different, or if you're searching for errors or bugs. So with this experimentation setup, we can also create the metrics specifically for every team and for every experiment. And these metrics are derived from your own data source. And the GrowthBook stats engine allows for all types of metrics. This makes it possible to analyze really everything in your experiments. Yeah, and because we have an SDK for basically every code base, you can run it everywhere. Right. So let's now dive in a bit more deeper on how we have implemented GrowthBook on the clients that we work for. Both implementation have performance, scalability in mind, and at the same time reducing the price per experiment. All right, so we have two implementation approaches. The first one is on Cloudflare pages, and the second one is on Cloudflare workers. Both rely on Cloudflare. Why we chose Cloudflare, it's a crazy fast CDN, and it's also very cheap. So the main differences between the two, for Cloudflare pages, you don't have to use the Cloudflare proxy on your website, but if you want to use Cloudflare workers, then you do need to run your site through the Cloudflare proxy. So what we've did is that we've bundled a few things into a single script. And the bundle contains, of course, the GrowthBook SDK, our own toolkit that allows for targeting so that we can target, for example, page types, login status, all those good things, or also viewports. So if visitors scroll to a certain part on the page, then we also have that targeting. And we have built-in Clarity and Hotjar integration so that for every experiment, we automatically generate heat maps and user session recordings, which is very useful if you are running experiments on low amounts of traffic, because then that meta information becomes really useful. And of course, the last part is the experiment code itself, so the A and the B version of a certain experiment. So we have these three things bundled into one script, and we have two different ways of executing that. The first one is the Cloudflare pages. The benefits of the Cloudflare pages is that you can host it on your own domain, or you can get it from our domain. And just having, and because it's just one JavaScript tag, it's the same as a implementation with, for example, convert.com. It's just one script tag that you place in the header, and that's it. Because the script tag is hosted from Cloudflare pages, you are not limited to the amount of visitors. So the rules on Cloudflare pages are that if you have a static asset, they are hosted for free on Cloudflare pages. So this means you can run this script tag on sites where you have 5 million daily visitors, and it's all fine. You won't be charged for that. Because it's on the Cloudflare CDN, of course, it's crazy fast. In the screenshot here, you have an example on how fast the script tag loads. And because it's on Cloudflare, you automatically get the monitoring tools from Cloudflare so that you can monitor the performance and the health of your own script tag. And normally you would not have that in other tooling. And the nice thing also about Cloudflare pages is that it integrates with GitHub. Developers can use their own developer tools where they can connect with their own GitHub and then upload experiment data or the experiment code. And for the developers that we work with, this is the major benefit compared to other tools, because normally they would need to copy and paste their code but now they can stay within their own environment where they have their own tooling, which makes their life a lot easier. Then there are the Cloudflare workers implementation. Now, I need to give a brief explanation about Cloudflare workers for those who are unfamiliar with that. But the Cloudflare CDN can function where you can activate workers, and they function as a sort of in between your server, the browser of the client. So all your site traffic will then be going through the cloud worker. And if an experiment needs to start, then the GrowthBook SDK on the worker will start the experiment. That means that the code is being rendered in the worker, and when it arrives on the client, it's already there. So the client or the browser doesn't need to do anything. So you get a complete free Flickr experience. And this technical setup is very similar to what SiteSpect offers. SiteSpect is also an experimentation platform. So this setup enables us to do actual SEO experiments because everything is already rendered on the server, not on the client anymore. And it's also crazy cheap thanks to the KV Store technology from Cloudflare. That basically means is that the GrowthBook experiment data is stored in the Cloudflare worker, and it only updates when there are changes detected through a webhook from GrowthBook. That means in most of the cases, the cloud worker doesn't need to do an API request to GrowthBook, which of course saves a lot of time, and experiments can be executed quickly. And we've seen experiments implementation where the core web vitals actually improved when we started working with the Cloudflare workers. So that's really cool. Also, to give you an example, we have done several Cloudflare pages implementations, and they go very quickly. So with Moneybird, for example, they were able to have GrowthBook running within a week, including connecting to the BigQuery and creating all the metrics. So yeah, that's a quick setup. So if it sounds technical, it is, but once you go into it, it's not that difficult to set up. Yeah, then let's dive a bit deeper into the analytics part of the experiment engine. And there are a few things that I really like with this setup. For example, with every experiment, we automatically get two very important experiment health checks, which are the sample ratio mismatch check and the multiple exposure check. And because we've connected GrowthBook to Slack, we also get automatic notifications in case something goes wrong. And these notifications also work if there are positive or negative effects detected on your primary, secondary, or even guardrail metrics that you've selected for your experiment. Yeah, and because these metrics are created in advance, it is very easy for marketers that do not have any BigQuery experience to add and remove metrics from experiments. So it's very user-friendly to use. Yes. Now, if you remember, and we have a lot of different type of experiments that we can run. Also connect tools like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or any other tool, but just basically run the code from within GrowthBook. The added benefit of that is that you then also automatically centralize your analytics and analysis. Because if you run the code from within GrowthBook, You automatically get the stats engine and all the metrics from GrowthBook with it. And this is good because then basically what you're doing is you are standardizing your metrics and analysis and stats engines across all your different experiments and tools. And then you can really compare apples to apples, where normally if you have a different personalization tool, you wouldn't, because then you would compare the analytics from that tool with, for example, GrowthBook. But now, because everything is standardized or centralized, every experiment that you run is using the same stats engine, the same metrics, and the same data source. So it makes it very reliable and of a higher quality. And finally, what I like here, because GrowthBook doesn't store any data, it just sits on top of your data warehouse. It's very attractive for legal teams because there's no information stored. Normally, the legal team, they already approved an analytics tool or a data warehouse, and a lot of time and effort has gone into that process. And adding a new tool like GrowthBook shouldn't be difficult. To give you an example, for our client Tom in Germany, Germany is very strict on privacy. I've had a meeting with their legal team and their outsourced lawyers that are responsible in consulting them on privacy stuff. Because GrowthBook isn't storing any data, we were able to argue that the GrowthBook cookie can be seen as an essential cookie because GrowthBook is enabling us to start and stop features of the website, and therefore it can be an essential cookie. This is a very big thing because what it enables us is that we can start experiments before a visitor gives consent. When they then do give consent, we can start the tracking, but then they have the same experience. Normally, any experimentation tool with a tracking function built in, all these tools are most of the time considered marketing cookies because of the way they track visitors. And so for marketing cookies, the visitor needs to give consent. So in that situation, visitor comes to the site, sees a homepage banner, then gives consent, and then he gets dumped into an experiment where there's a different homepage banner. So then there is a difference in the user experience between the time give consent. And that's obviously bad for your experiment data and the reliability. And it's bad for the user experience. But because of this setup that we have now, we don't have that issue anymore. So this makes it for a better user experience for the user and for us because we have better data in our experiments. So let's go back and summarize. So with this setup, we can deal with all the challenges and the struggles while respecting everybody's different ways of working and their needs. But at the same time, we are able to scale experimentation. And as we scale, we are able to reduce the price per experiment. So yeah, we are very happy with the setup that we have created and can highly recommend to do something similar. And yeah, we are not done, far from it, as every presentation in 2025 and 2024 needs to have some AI slide in it. Warning, here is my AI slide. But because we now have a solid technical foundation, we can actually go much further. So what I want to do this year is to connect our project management tool through API with the experiment engine, because then I am able, from within the experimentation management tool, to create experiments, change the status of experiments, And that saves me from doing double work, which obviously is very nice. And the second thing is, we now spend quite a bit of time on reporting and analysis, even though we already saved a lot of time in how we now get the data and do the analysis. But we can go even further when we connect the project management tool with AI so that we can automate the analysis. Because if we have the experiment data through an API in our project management tool, we can also start to automate the analysis and the reporting. And then finally, because we have that connection and the more experiments we are running over time, we can train AI on our experiments knowledge base to help with the experiment generation. So yeah, that's a lot of cool stuff that we are working on this year and looking forward to working on that. But I think that's it. If you have questions, now's the time. And if you're interested in finding out the cost of running Cloudflare workers, I have a calculator on our website. I think Kathy is going to share the link with you. And yeah, if you don't have questions but want to connect, then you can find me on LinkedIn. Thanks,
So
everybody.
great presentation, Rudy. So we did have actually a question from Ahmed, and it's around how Cloudflare analytics with GDPR. Just wondering how reliable is it, and if you could compare it with GA4.
Okay. We are not actually using Cloudflare Analytics. We always use the existing analytics platform that is there for our client. We just use Cloudflare for the hosting of the script tag or running it through the workers. So the only Cloudflare analytics that we would use is the default performance analytics Cloudflare uses.
Okay, cool. We actually have another question from Tom as well, which is if your growth book setup uses essential cookies or GA4 tracking for experiments.
Yes, we use GA4 for tracking. That means when an experiment starts, and for that matter, when everything happens in an experiment in terms of tracking, we publish that onto the data layer. So when an experiment starts, yeah, we just publish stuff to the data layer. But if there's no consent from the visitor, then there is no Google Analytics. So it will not go to Google Analytics because the Google Analytics implementation is tied to the cookie consent logic. So in that way, we are never tracking until we get consent. So like I said, for every experiment and every interaction from the user, we use the data layer. So we publish everything to the data layer. And for all the existing tracking that is already there in the current GA Analytics implementation, we don't need to add that to our code. All that information is already stored in BigQuery. We just need to retrieve that information from BigQuery into GrowthBook. We built metrics based on the existing Google Analytics tracking. I hope I explained it clearly. If not, I'll try again.
Folks can add more questions to either chat or Q&A. I think Tom's good with that. Vladimir asked around product analytics. Are you using GrowthBook or are you using Mixpanel?
For the stats, for the experiment analysis, we use GrowthBook. But the actual data is coming from the analytics platform. So that could be Google Analytics, but it could also be Mixpanel. It just depends where that data is stored. GrowthBook offers a lot of data warehouse integrations. So yeah, wherever you have stored that Mixpanel data, if it's stored in a data warehouse that you can connect to with GrowthBook, then you can retrieve that you can build metrics that are based on that data from that data warehouse. And then you can do the experiment analysis in GrowthBook.
Excellent. Okay, I think we have time for this one last question, and it's from Marco. What else is the Cloudflare CDN used for? Can you explain more about how these SEO experiments are done?
Yeah. So um, the Cloudflare CDN, if you connect your website to it, then Cloudflare, all the traffic is going through the Cloudflare servers to your server. And a lot of websites do this to guard themselves from DDoS attacks. So Cloudflare is used a lot throughout the web. And they have various different products. And Cloud Workers is one of those products. If you have your site connected to Cloudflare, meaning you're using Cloudflare as a proxy between your website visitor and your own server, then you can use Cloud Workers. And on these workers, you can install all kinds of apps and scripts and stuff, and they execute those when the traffic goes through it. Because normally what you would have, for example, convert or optimizely, you would have a script tag, and that script tag sits in the head of the website. And when the browser loads the website, then that script tag is executed, meaning it's executed on the client. But now you can put a GrowthBook on the cloud worker. And then the experiment can be executed on the worker. And this is needed in order to do SEO experiments, because the Google bot also goes through the worker. And because the changes are rendered on the worker, the Google bot will believe that what it sees there is the actual website. And basically when you're running or launching your experiment from there, because it's already rendered there, the client or the browser client has to do less work. So the website will always be loaded faster. So, and that performance benefit is a big benefit in terms of SEO.
Excellent. I'm wondering if you have time for one more question. If not, I can close it out.
No, sure, let's go. Let's go.
Okay,
Let's
okay.
go.
So Govind asks, how does GrowthBook manage the lifetime of cookies, and how does it distinguish user sessions to ensure proper traffic splitting? Oh, okay. I can send it to you. It's in the chat.
Ah, okay.
Do you get it? If not, I can answer that offline.
Yeah, so the GrowthBook cookie is set through the SDK, and either way, if you're doing the pages approach or the worker approach, it will be a first party cookie. So it's gonna have a long lifetime. Yeah, and because it will have a, even according to ITP stand tracking prevention, it's going to have long enough lifetime to run your experiments. But as a general rule of thumb, we do not run experiments longer than 28 days, because there have been quite a bit of studies about cookie lifetime. And after 28 days, a lot of people either delete or automatically delete their cookies. And that can cause problems for the proper traffic splitting and also for multiple exposure effects. Yeah, so independently from GrowthBook, we do not run our experiments longer than 28 days.
Okay, with that, any other questions? Okay, that brings us an end to the session. A huge thank you to you, Rudy, for sharing your insight and everyone else for joining. Keep an eye on your inbox where we'll send a link to the recording for today's webinar and the resources that Rudy shared. And here's a link to his LinkedIn in case everyone wants to connect with Rudy. I'm sure everyone does. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Okay. Thanks.